Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Multispeed Technologies, the show that puts you, the listener, in the driver's seat because you are the content. The phone lines are open to be a part of the program. It's a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. Give me a call. We'll have a conversation about your tech questions or business insight questions. Linux advocate, above all else, small business owner, now host of the only radio show centered around you, the listener. Welcome to the Ask Noah Show. My name is Noah Chalaya. Good evening and welcome into the Ask Noah Show. As I said, I am your host, Noah Chalaya, and I am happy to be here with you. Last week was a bad week for us in the IT world, and news is still coming out about Spectre and Meltdown vulnerabilities that affect all modern Intel processors and AMD to some lesser extent. Now, if you're just joining us live and you're not part of the usual crowd that downloads and listens to the show, I'd invite you to head over to asknoahshow.com, click on the downloads section, and grab episode number 43. Given the nature of these attacks, we couldn't just wait for our usual airtime. And we know there are people out there that depend on this show, that count on the show to provide them with a condensed version of the story. So check out episode 43, and we spend the first 15 minutes giving you a basic breakdown of what you need to know, what you need to understand. We go into just enough detail that you'll really understand this vulnerability, but not so much that it, bores your ears off. And then the rest of the episode, after the first 15 minutes, then we just kind of kicked back and chatted and kind of talked with it. Michael Tennell joined me as a special guest. Now, I'll have a link to that episode in this episode's show notes. Because that is, I think we did a pretty good job of breaking it down there. And obviously the situation is fluid and things are coming in rapidly, and we are going to continue to bring information as it becomes available, including bringing you industry experts on to the show. But as this is the Ask Noah Show, and you guys called to hear my opinion on things, and people are calling in to ask my opinion on things, we'll go to the phones. Carrie from California is calling. Hey, Carrie, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hi, how you doing?
Hey, pretty good. How can we help?
I had some questions regarding Spectre and Meltdown with regard to the microcode for the processor being patched at boot time by the kernel.
Okay, I'll answer it if I can.
For Windows, my understanding for Windows computers is that they have to have a BIOS or firmware update, whereas I've heard that for Linux, the kernel can patch that during the boot time. But I'm just wondering, is that true? And if so, are all processors affected by this being patched at boot time with updated kernels, or is this going to be rolled out over time as more and more processors are actually supported with updates?
That's a great question. Carrie. Let me do this. We've got the Mumble Room with us. Is there anyone in the Mumble Room that can speak authoritatively to this?
Authoritatively?
Well,
no.
Okay.
But in consideration,
yeah, sure.
All our hardware already exists, right? So all of the microcode is already, or it's updatable, and it can be replaced. So all the previous hardware that we've already bought has to only get new features or ways of functioning by new microcode updates.
Okay.
So in terms of microcode updates, the only way to fix current hardware that isn't already produced or manufactured in the future, which has this mitigation in the chip or in the silicon.
Okay, that makes sense. Carrie, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess I'm curious about the current status then. Does that mean that only certain processors have received some of the updates that are being, updated in the kernel? Or does that mean that, most processors that are affected by this are being updated? Because my understanding is that you can patch some of this in software, but not all of it is fixed unless you actually update the microcode for the processor.
Well, I tell you what, let me do this. Let me put you back on hold here for a second, and let me introduce our guest that was joining us this hour, because this is something we're bringing him on to speak authoritatively on. Obviously, I am a tech guy. I am a system administrator, so I deal with this stuff at a very basic level. I apply the patches level, but I don't hack on kernel code, and I'm certainly not talking to the people that do. But our guest that's coming on this hour does talk to the people that do works directly with them. Red Hat has played a integral role into this. They were one of the first companies to get a patch out into their Linux systems, and we have Brandon Johnson joining us from Red Hat. Hey, Brandon, welcome to the program.
Hi, Noah. How are you doing?
Excellent. Now you're coming back on the program. This isn't the first time you've been here. You've been on once or twice before?
Yeah, I think it's twice now. Now this will be the third. So.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to bring Carrie back on the line. Carrie, you still there?
Yes, I'm still here.
So I don't know, Brandon, when exactly you joined us, but Carrie, could you repeat your question to Brandon? We'll see if he has any insight for you.
Okay. So my question was regarding updating the microcode for the processors. My understanding is that this issue cannot be completely protected against without updating the microcode. My understanding, again, I may be wrong, is that the kernel can update the microcode during boot time, or you can also update it via doing BIOS updates. But I'm wondering, does this mean that only certain processors are actually being protected right now because these patches are still kind of coming out and there's a wide range of processors affected? Or am I completely wrong in my thinking? And so please just correct me about that.
No, you're correct. So most of the hardware vendors are going to need to push out microcode updates for their hardware. So HP is going to need to, Dell, etc. I know IBM is pushing out some stuff for their processors because everyone's thinking of x86, but Power was also affected. So was Z series. There's a so all the vendors are going to have to push this out. But the microcode that was shipped with RHEL or CentOS or Ubuntu, that should fix some of it. But you need to also rely on your vendor to push out microcode updates.
Does that answer your question, Carrie?
Okay, so yeah, I think so. If I could just do one quick follow-up.
Yeah.
Would that mean if I had a 2015 server that's kind of a little bit older, so probably not getting patches right away, if I updated RHEL, would the microcode updates in RHEL be supporting or updating the microcode in my processor, or would it only be if I have the latest and greatest processor at this point? And speaking from for an Intel platform.
Yeah, I haven't looked too deep into the microcode that we shipped. I should have before this, but it should. Intel wrote that, so basically, just it should be in the. If you're running an Intel CPU, it should update it.
Okay, that answers my question.
Cool. Thanks for the call. We appreciate it. Again, the phone line's 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email live@asknoahshow.com. Hey, Brandon, so this is, it's been, I bet you're having an interesting week at Red Hat. I bet it's been a fun time.
It is. I mean, with customers asking, barraging us with questions. It's actually just a little, We're actually doing a Q&A on Thursday. I posted it in the chat. We're tweeting about Red Hat's tweeting about it. I've tweeted about it. So we're going to be doing a Q&A on it on Thursday. So if you have a question, please go and join it. That our performance engineering team is putting that on. So it's mostly it's question. People don't really have questions anymore about the vulnerability. They have questions. How am I going to get my performance back?
Right, yeah. So when you and I were chatting was it last night or the night before? And I said, what do you think about this? Is this a huge deal, or is this a little deal? Is it getting blown out of proportion? Are people rightly to be concerned about this? And you said, yeah, there's a performance hit for sure. And you said in certain instances you're seeing 10 times reduction in performance. Yeah,
it just depends. I mean, these are lab. This is all lab stuff, but I go into what I can. But some of our lab stuff, it's a huge hit. It's not small. I mean, but that was a worst case scenario. Probably not most people. But really, the thing that's not going to get hit the most is people using Linux day to day on their laptop. I mean, 'cause most of that stuff is in user space. So, and that user space performance really hasn't been affected at all.
Right.
I think what's been hit the most is high performance computing. One of the things that I was chatting with you last night about was going to disk is very kernel intensive, and you need your CPU to help process, help churn that out, and the functions are now being disabled or on the CPU, or just being not very useful for writing to disk, especially, or even reading from disk, especially if it's like a file server that's pulling files, the same file over and over and over again. So high performance computing and things like that. That's also that's heavily affected.
How about virtual infrastructure? Because one of the things that I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years is that people are virtualizing like crazy, and be it on VMware or on Liberty or over, which you've come on the program and talked about previously. But we have set up a number of virtual infrastructures, and now I'm sitting back and I'm going, man, all of these machines are probably largely going to take a performance hit because of this. Did I lose you?
And you're right, they are. No, I'm back. Yeah, no, they are going to take a performance hit, but there are handfuls. There's a handful of ways to mitigate it. One of them is like with KVM in particular. So actually, really quick, if I want to mention this first before I go into this. Please go, if you're running KVM, patch your host, patch your guests. Do it now. The reason why I'm saying that is I actually did a test on this in my home lab on an unpatched host. I can actually read even on a patched guest. It's
really?
Yeah. You can do all kinds of fun stuff with unpatched hosts.
So it's the host is unpatched. So to put this into real world perspective, let's say I'm on a DigitalOcean droplet, and I patch my DigitalOcean droplet because I'm a good system administrator. But let's say they didn't patch their host machine, and of course they would, because that's kind of why people flock to places like DigitalOcean, because they do such a good job maintaining their infrastructure. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, that they hadn't, then my system is still vulnerable, even though I'm running the latest kernel. I have that patch.
Yeah, so if their host gets compromised, the guests are compromised. I would consider the guests compromised.
Right. Yeah, interesting. Well, I want to continue this. You're not a time crunch at all, are you?
No, I'm free the whole hour. So,
cool.
one of the things I also want to mention really fast,
sure,
if you don't mind, is there are ways to mitigate some of the performance issues and on virtualization. So one is just making sure that all the CPU types are the same. Make sure they're using, and if specifically on the guest, just make sure that the guest CPU type matches the host. And the easiest way to handle that is just say is in the drop down when you build a VM, is just tell it to use the host CPU instruction set.
Yeah,
that's all you have to do. And then there's a few other options that need to be configured. I'm going to be blogging about this. I'm going to be writing something up about this here pretty soon. So I'll get into more. We can get into more details.
Yeah, I do. I want to dig into that and more. I also want to talk about that event that you guys are holding and how people can participate in that. But I see callers are coming in. I assume you're okay if we take some calls? I'll just assume that's right.
Yeah.
Cool, great. So let's start with Brian in Ontario. Hey, Brian, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hi, how's it going?
Hey, excellent. How can we help?
I have a couple questions, not anything to do with Meltdown or anything, but
sure.
I wanted to know, you've done some kiosk stuff in the past, I've heard, and I have some kids that I'd like to, have some control over what goes on the computer when I'm not around. So I wanted to see if there was a way you could point me into having user accounts where if you log into that account, then there's only like one program or one website or something like that you could go to, like an educational program or something like that.
Sure.
And still have other accounts where you can log in and do whatever you want.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Brandon, what's your thoughts?
I never really thought about that, but just like kiosk style stuff. I've always I like using like being able to just blow away any configuration that's ever happened on it every single time, like just have it check in with like an Ansible server or a Puppet server. But
sure.
That's probably way overblown.
That's a valid answer. That would work. And you could have it set up so that you can. The nice thing about that is if the kids do screw it up, then that Ansible server comes in, pulls down a new config. I'll tell you, Brian. Here's what I would do. What we do at our hotels is we have two different types of kiosks. The first is like the generic, what you think of when you think of like a web guest kiosk. It's just a computer that has a web browser, both web browsers, Firefox and Chrome, and has like Adobe Flash and a PDF reader and all the things that people need to get the stuff done they want to get done on the internet, right? And we have a printer installed and stuff like that. Now, for that kind of configuration, we use basically a script that just it takes a tarball when we first set the machine up of the user's home directory and stores it, and we call that the sterile copy, and we just store that in the root directory. And then we have a script, and every time the computer boots up, the computer blows away the current user's home directory and then untarballs that sterile copy and institutes a new copy as the user's home directory, and then we remove elevated permissions from that kiosk user, so the user doesn't have access to anything outside of their home directory because they're not a privileged user, and we can control almost everything because all the bookmarks, all the settings, all of that stuff is stored inside of the home directory in some form or another. And the things that aren't things like the Wi-Fi connection, the IP address, stuff like that, it will lock you out if you're not a privileged user. So that's how we've been able to mitigate that. Now, if I understand what you're talking about, you're saying you want to actually restrict which certain types of applications. Now, the second type of kiosk that we set up, and we've set this up for businesses that this isn't guest facing, it's employee facing, but you still want to lock the machine down quite a bit. And what we do in those situations is we actually use XFCE. We install the applications that are there, and we customize the panels, and we put a big panel along the bottom, kind of like a dock, so to speak, and we put only the applications those employees are supposed to be using. Now, if you have a really smart kid, are they going to be able to open the terminal and run the program? Yeah, they are. But 99% of the time, that's enough. It's kind of like we say that we put locks on the doors to keep the honest people honest. That's kind of how I look at the kiosk thing. Is that an acceptable solution, or is that not secure enough for you?
It's certainly something to get me started. Like basically, I'm using Timekeeper to give them so many hours per day on the computer. But then,
sure.
I want to be able to have certain things that they can run whenever they want because they're not Netflix and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I'll give another unsolicited plug. And thank you, Brian, for the call. I'll give another unsolicited plug for a router, and I'll have a link in the show notes. I can't think of the who it's made by, but Koala, I think it's called. But basically, it's the router that we have in our house for the kids. They're on their own separate network, and basically, what this router does is it allows you to put in a schedule. Say like each MAC address is allowed a certain amount of. It wouldn't be under orders. It'd be under. Let's see. Here we go. It'll put in here and it'll say. This is how many hours that each MAC address can get, and so their tablet can get one. Yeah, it's called the Koala Safe, KOALASAFE, and it's basically a router specifically for kids. Got a little web UI, has a little app, and you can put in there, and it kind of takes the parenting administration and dumbs it down a little bit for you, so you can not dumbs it down, but just makes it a little bit more powerful and gives you a little web UI, so you can have as Chris would say, a dashboard for days. Again, Brian, thanks for the call. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, can I add on to this a little bit?
Please.
I apologize. Yeah.
Please.
So I was just thinking about it. So like if you're managing like kiosks or even lots of kiosks or even just a handful, just came in my head a project called Fleet Commander. Would definitely help with this because you can enforce policies and say you cannot install this application, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. I mean, it's the ultimate in like restricting a Linux machine because it goes through G settings, does all kinds of really good stuff that you can just lock down the machine.
I have to ask, did you think of Fleet Commander because I was talking about really cool dashboards? Because Fleet Commander has like one of the coolest dashboards out there.
No, a little bit before.
Okay. All right. Joe
It does have a good dashboard.
Yeah, it does. It's absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't checked out Fleet Commander, you should. It'll change your life. Joe is calling from Pennsylvania. Hey, Joe, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. Your question. Your question for Brandon and me.
Yeah, sure. So, as you probably know, churches across the country are starting to take security and safety a little more seriously, and our church is looking for at least a security system for video cameras where we can monitor one building and then monitor two buildings, but from one place. So,
Sure.
What's like a good balance between easy to use security surveillance systems and a decent price range?
Yeah, absolutely. Joe, before I answer your question, I got to ask, did you by chance use a contact form and reach out to us through Altispeed a couple months ago?
Yeah, that's me.
Okay, so the email address you provided was wrong, and it has been driving me nuts. And I'll tell you why. A lot of you, if you know me personally, you know that I have a strong walk with God, and I'm not the kind of person that wears my religion on my sleeve. That's just not who I am. But it is a central part of my being, and so when the opportunity presents itself, I don't shy away from talking about it. And so, Joe, the answer to your question is Unify. Unify is one of the most cost-effective, easy-to-set-up solutions that exist for IP video, really video cameras in general, because what you can do, Joe, is you can set the NVR, the controller, up at any place, and the cameras will connect via IP. So there's a number of different ways you could solve the problem you're trying to solve, right? You could put cameras at different buildings and use a VPN to connect them to the NVR, or you could have an NVR at each building. We have a hotel actually that has 3 different locations, but it's all owned by the same owner, and he wants to be able to look at them all at once. And so we have NVRs at each location and cameras at each location. Then he can just enter in the appropriate IP address or host name, and it pulls it up. Now, I do want to tell, does that answer your question, I guess, before I go any further?
Yeah, the only one concern is that I'm pretty much the only true techie at my church, and even I'm not super technical. So I'm trying to have systems where I can train someone and move on to the next project.
Yep.
Do you think that system will be easy enough for a volunteer to pick up within a month or two?
Yeah, man. It's just a web page. I mean, you literally type in the web page of the host name, you click on the camera you want. It's super easy. Now, Joe, I do want to make an offer to you, and we can talk about this more off air. But officially speaking, Altispeed Technologies policy is that we offer a deep discount to houses of worship. Unofficially, again, my personal belief is that we are called as Christians to give back to the kingdom of God. So I will donate all of my time to set all of this up for you, as well as I'd like to donate some of the equipment. So I'm going to put you back on hold, and I'll have Sarah pick up and get your particulars down, and you and I will get in contact. And I'd love to help you out with this project, because I think it's very much something worth doing. And thanks for calling the Ask Noah Show. We appreciate having you. Chaz is calling from New York. Hey, Chaz, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, Noah, great to talk to you at the new time.
My microphone wasn't on. My guest here and I we're chatting on the computer, and I reached over to respond to you, and I didn't realize my microphone wasn't on. I'm such a noob. Hey, Chaz, yeah, it's great to be on Tuesday. My mind hasn't fully adjusted. In fact, our video producer was telling me the other day, he's like, I'm just not used to you not having a show on Monday, and I'm like, yeah, it's because I'm so consistent. Like, if I say I'm going to do something, and it gets done. How can we help, Chaz?
Well, I want to take you back in time to the last days of the Linux Action Show to set up my question.
Okay.
If you remember, you and Chris both had simultaneous failures of Arch around the same time, around the end of the Linux Action Show. And it got you guys talking about the concept of a bulletproof Linux. And could you have a bulletproof Linux, and what would a bulletproof Linux look like?
Right.
Fast forward to now, we are 4 months removed from a new Ubuntu LTS, a radical change in the Ubuntu LTS, and they're very much trying to push the idea of snaps. My question to you is, are snaps over the new GNOME-inspired Ubuntu, how close does that get to the bulletproof Linux idea that you guys were exploring in the last days of LAS?
I'm gonna rope Brandon in on this. I'd love to get your take as well, Brandon.
Yeah, so from my perspective, well, I'm a little biased. I mean, I work for RedHat, but my bulletproof Linux, I have a workstation that runs RHEL, and for me, that workstation doesn't move. It's RHEL 7 right now. It's RHEL 7.4. GNOME's at 3.20. Yeah, I think it's 3.20 or 3.22. I don't remember the exact version, but for me, that's perfect. And what's great about 7.4 or CentOS 7.4, whether you're talking RHEL or CentOS, is it supports Flatpak. So if I need something a little bit newer that's not in the repos, I can get it. So that's been really nice for me because I don't like my workstation to move, and I've been using CentOS or RHEL for my workstations for quite some time. And from a Fedora perspective, I use Fedora on my laptops just because battery life is a little better. Fedora has been great since Fedora 23. I mean, I reinstalled Fedora since at least Fedora 23. It might have been 22, but I bet like for me, Fedora is Fedora and Enterprise Linux is the bulletproof workstation. That's my opinion.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And as a Fedora user for a long time, I can echo a lot of what you said. Here's my perspective on it, Chaz. I'll tell you. And if Chris, I don't know, is he still here? Yeah, start drop. So he's at least near IRC. If he wants to call in, I'd loop him into this conversation too. I don't like, But so here's kind of my take on it. For the longest time, I was running Ubuntu or Fedora, and Chris was running Ubuntu for a long time, and then he switched over to using Arch. And his rationale for that for the longest time was Ubuntu is good, but there's a better Linux experience out there. And when we were at System 76, it was in November of 2015. We had probably an hour-long debate, if you will. We were on air, but we weren't actually doing the show. It was like, I don't know what we were doing. We were doing something. But we're having this debate on the benefits and detractors of Ubuntu versus Arch. And one of the things that I said it was that Ubuntu was very, very, very polished. It was a desktop distribution that was extremely well polished. So many of the edges were just really filed off, and it felt like a very cohesive experience. Now, it wasn't moving. It wasn't on the cutting edge. It was like there was really not any seriously significant changes between 1204 until 1710, whenever GNOME was. I mean, it's basically the same field. If I sat 10 people in front of it, unless they knew what they were looking for, a lot of them are just going to say, it's about the same thing. But it's a really polished desktop experience. And what snaps do, and Brandon, feel free to chime in here if I'm wrong on this, what I think snaps do is they remove the importance of the underpinnings of the desktop and make it more about the presentation of the desktop. As long as the desktop is responsive, as long as GNOME doesn't crash, as long as it looks pretty, all of the underpinnings, all of the actual important mechanical stuff underneath, that's all being containerized now.
I'd echo that. Like, I use Flatpak instead of snaps, but either way, I mean, the concept's the same. I mean, it's containerized. And that's why I use RHEL 7 for my workstations, because applications are containerized. All its runtime is all bundled together, and my workstation can stay static. What's great, what I like about what I have going is if I decided not to upgrade my machine until 2023, whenever RHEL 7 goes end of life, I'm going to have a supported desktop that gets security patches.
Yeah, exactly. Chaz, how does that ring for you?
I think I'm understanding what you're saying, and I had one follow up if I could, real quick.
Please.
So I thought of it when you mentioned 1710. Normally, when the new LTS comes out, I download, install it right away. Thing is, though, I have a Lenovo X260, and I got a couple people who I install Linux for that I kind of responsible for maintaining their systems.
Sure.
Should I wait, given what happened with 1710, a couple days before installing the LTS, or do you think the LTS is going to be, do you think they're going to give special attention to the LTS to make sure that what happened with Lenovo's and Acer's doesn't happen again?
Yeah, my gut tells me that Canonical is going to be extraordinarily well tuned into the release of 1804 for a number of reasons. One is that there were so many little things that popped up on the LTS, the last LTS, the 1604, that weren't in the LTS like a day before, because Chris and I reviewed it. And then we actually got the actual LTS, and it was like a totally different animal in a lot of ways. And for that reason, as well as what has happened with 1710, because I can tell you, I've spoken to people at Canonical. They are riveted to their customers' feedback, the users' feedback for 1710, because they really want to see how this GNOME thing is going, how they've made a couple other changes. They want to see how those things are going to play out before they make their decision on what they're going to roll out. Actually, I guess I can talk about it. The different Wayland, I guess we did talk. We had an interview about that, so I can talk about that. But how is Wayland going to do in 1710? And if it works well, that will drive their decision for 1804. So no, I think you're probably safe to install it. I might wait a week, because what's the rush? I mean, the nice thing about the LTS is you have so much overlap,
Right, of course.
Yeah, so that's what I would do. I'd install it, but I would probably wait a week. And I'll tell you, I won't be waiting a week. The second 1804 ships, I want it on my machine, because I want to get to because that's where that's where the world is. Eric is calling from Kansas City. Hey, Eric, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hey, good evening, Noah.
Hey, how's it going?
Going really well. How about you?
Good, Eric. Can I trouble you to just speak directly into your phone? I'm having a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, much better. Okay, great. Yeah, your question for Brandon and me.
So, as you know, I've got an IT consulting business that I'm working on growing. And one of the things I'm looking at offering is just drop-in replacements for existing systems. Talked in the past about the users buying the wrong version of Windows and not being able to join Active Directory. So I'm looking at being able to drop in replacements with laptops. But I'm having trouble checking out Office systems based on need. What do you look for CPU-wise, performance-wise? Do you go the i7, or can you get by with an i5? What material do you look at to make that decision?
Sure, Brandon, what are your thoughts? Brandon, there he is.
Just like drop. Can you expand on that a little bit? Just like drop-in replacements, like specific for what? Like any business type of product, or use case, like the Active. You mentioned Active Directory.
Right. A lot of my customers, a lot of my potential clients are still on Windows, and my hope is to start moving them over to Linux. But that's not always possible, at least maybe not 100%. So I basically see two different groups of users that I would come across. Your basic Office user who's using the web browser for 80% of their work, and then basic Office solutions like email and word processing. But then I would see another group of, say, power users. This may be someone who's doing some graphic design for marketing for their company, maybe video editing. I'm sure there's other categories, but there's the two that stand out the most.
Okay, I think I see where you're going. So, I've actually done this. I was actually talking to Noah about this on chat last week. That I've been doing a lot of retrospective of my career lately. And one of the things I did very early in my career is I helped migrate a company that was quite large, well over 5,000 employees, from Windows to Linux on the desktop. And one of the things that I would recommend anyone that does anything like this is to one, if you're going to want to start moving them to Linux or do something like that on their Windows box, install Firefox or Chrome, and install LibreOffice. Just give them a taster of what they're going to go. And if they actually use LibreOffice, if they actually use Chrome over Edge, that's a good stepping stone. And then always target task workers first. I mean, if all they use is a web browser, Linux, that's a fantastic use case.
Yeah.
If you want to do a drop-in replacement for anything else, like a replace Active Directory, Samba 4 is fantastic for that. And if you eventually want to replace it all, there's project, and you want to use for identity, and if you still need identity systems, FreeIPA is great for that as well, for handling doing identity. If you're looking at replacing Active Directory and other things like email and stuff, like you need to keep, like, one of the things that I learned from this is you need to keep the experience the same across all platforms. So whether if you're moving people from Windows or Mac to Linux, the email client needs to look is the same,
right?
On Linux, like evolution is sometimes it breaks, but it's a godsend because it looks just like Outlook.
Yeah. The other thing you can do is you can use cross-platform applications like Thunderbird. I'll tell you, Eric, I'll tell you our go-to, Altispeed's go-to. If a customer calls us, they say we want to replace our front desk computer, our office computer, our general manager's computer. Our go-to specs are latest gen i5, 16 gigs of RAM, and an SSD 120 or bigger. And what we found is that those specifications will handle like 90% of use cases. And you have, like, when you start getting into video editing, or even if you're doing like large graphic design or photo editing and stuff, you might want to revisit that and look at discrete graphics. But as far as like a general go-to model, like the Optiplex, I think it's the 3050 is what we're up to now. The Optiplex 3050 with an i5, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 120 SSD. That is a recipe for success in almost every case. I don't know, Brandon, if you agree with that, or. Oh
yeah, I totally agree. Core i5 is more than enough.
Chat room also points out that Office 365 has the Outlook web app. Oh, no. They don't even charge for the Outlook web app. That one's free. But then they have the Office 365, which is a web app too. So you can, again, talking about keeping that experience consistent across all platforms. And Eric, Brandon would actually be a great guy to ask about your virtualization question.
Yeah, Noah and I were talking a little bit earlier in the day about the new vulnerabilities that have come out, and it dawned on me while you were talking, Brandon. My day job relies heavily on ESX, whereas my home network and my IT guys, my IT consulting network is more dependent upon libvirt. So my question would be, with these patches, have you seen who gets a worse performance hit? Would it be the ESXis out there or the libvirt systems?
I haven't seen benchmarks from VMware. I've seen ours. There's like some of the recommendations I said earlier, like that helps mitigate. Another one is make sure that the feature called PCID is enabled on your processors. So that's another important thing. Probably one of the things we've noticed internally is that pre-Skylake is more vulnerable. I think that this is public knowledge everywhere. But pre-Skylake, it seems to be hit the worst, like any processor pre-Skylake. Skylake seems to not hit the performance hit is not as bad.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, Eric, for the call. Again, the phone number 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624. The email live at AskNoahShow.com. If you're just joining us, Brandon Johnson from RedHat is joining us now. Brandon, the reason I had him ask you that virtualization question is because virtualization is kind of your wheelhouse, right?
Yeah, I've been working with KVM for forever, I guess.
Yeah, you have, and you've come on this program and talked about it. So I'll let the phone line stack up there for a little bit. I see a couple of you still on hold. We'll get back to you, but I just want to dive in. And the reason we brought Brandon on is we want to pick his brain about these latest Intel vulnerabilities. Now, again, if you download episode 43, we'll dig into it a little deeper, but I'll just take a couple moments and give you guys the cliff notes. Basically, back in the 1960s, a technology called speculative execution was invented, which essentially you can think of it like going into a diner day after day and placing the same order. And then at some point, the owner of that restaurant notices a pattern and starts to make your dinner for you before you actually arrive. And one day you come in and you order something else. Now the diner has to throw out that original meal and make you a new meal. And the CPU does very much the same thing with the problems that you present to it. While it's waiting for data to be returned from main memory, which can take, upwards of 100 to 200 cycles of the CPU, it can look ahead and then try to execute some of the upcoming actions while it's waiting for that data to be returned. Now, if we go back to this, if the speculative execution gets it wrong, just like in our diner example, it dumps the information. But if it's correct, then the CPUs, in fact, become more efficient. So the issue lies in the fact that back in the 1960s, when this idea of speculative execution was invented, computers were basically doing one thing at a time. They weren't powerful enough to multitask. Today, you run multiple programs, you run multiple things on your machine, and when it comes to virtual machines, which again, Brandon is an expert on, you literally have potentially hundreds of machines sharing the same resources. And so there's no real security in that trash can, in our analogy, that these machines dump data to. So one virtual server, as Brandon was explaining at the beginning of the episode, when it throws an incorrect data away, an unsecured machine could then steal it. And that's where I have to stop and say that all of and correct me if I'm wrong, Brandon, but all of this is a theoretical attack. There are no proven cases of this. This isn't actually being actively exploited. This is just proven possible.
Yes, it's just been proven possible. But it's, critical enough that, everyone is running around with their heads cut off, patching systems, getting and fixing the exploits as best they can. And this, what really sucks is that it's a Band-Aid, and that's what really stinks about this. Because you can't.
Well, here's my thing. So basically, here's the assumption we have to work on. We have to work on the assumption that you have to be able to run code on the machine. And so if we are accepting that anyone can arbitrarily run code on your machine, then we have way bigger fishes to fry than this latest bug, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it's really my big worry about it is right, at least at the moment, is the performance hit. I mean, with virtualization, you have speculative execution is fantastic for virtualization because you have multiple systems running on the same machine, and usually they're all running the same process. In some cases, they are running the same processes. System D, for example, because every one of your Linux guys is probably running System D as a process. So virtualization is going to take a hit. I don't know how bad yet. I haven't really seen benchmarks on that yet.
Sure.
But we'll
Yeah, we'll continue. We'll continue to watch it. I want to get your take on this. So the situation has not gotten any better since Friday. In fact, it's gotten worse. We did a special episode on Friday to talk about this and reported that AMD was saying that they were largely unaffected by this latest bug. Now today we're hearing a different story from AMD. According to reports from users, the patch that Microsoft has released, and that is, and I have it here, KB405689 it's leaving some AMD user systems completely unbootable. So after installation, the system will no longer boot. Instead, it just displays like the Windows logo, and there's no little animation below. And by the way, this is a great point to stop and say, this is a good example of, and I could spend the rest of the episode talking about why boot screen should display useful information instead of some cheap digital imitation of a CEO's professional motion desk ornament, flying around in a stupid circle. But what I thought was interesting, and I want to get your take on this, Brandon, is Microsoft's response to this. Microsoft says it's AMD's fault. AMD, it's your fault. After investigation, Microsoft has determined that AMD chipsets do not conform to the documentation previously provided to Microsoft to develop Windows operating system mitigations to protect against the chipset vulnerability known as Spectre and Meltdown. So I'm interested, like, where does this leave us, Brandon? Like, we thought it was all Intel's fault. Now it turns out that yes, maybe AMD wasn't directly affected by the bug, but now they're being affected by the patch. And the result of this, by the way, is Microsoft has halted this update. So even if you're on an Intel system, my understanding is unless you're part of the Windows Insider program and we're already able to get patched, they halted this before Patch Tuesday.
Yeah, well, for me, this just reinforces the need for open source chips and more open source operating systems. So more eyes on the code, more eyes on the specifications.
Yeah.
But AMD though they were hit by Spectre. They weren't hit by Meltdown. So either way, patches need to happen for AMD processors.
Well, but so hold on. I need clarification. I'm sorry if I'm getting this wrong. So Meltdown is the CPU thing that can be patched. Spectre is the software the software exploit. But the patch for Meltdown that Microsoft released is what was bricking AMD systems. Is that not correct?
I haven't read that story today.
Okay.
So I can't really talk with authority on that.
Sure.
But what AMD is susceptible to the Spectre exploit. Meltdown is more that exploit is more so on Intel than on anyone else. From my understanding.
Sure.
So I may have that wrong.
You're probably on. I just as I'm going through this, it seems like every time we turn around, it's like there's some new huge issue. And so today, reading this story about how Microsoft has halted these patches because of what's happening to AMD systems, it's like, really it is an industry issue, even if it was Microsoft, or even if it was, Intel that started this. So I don't know. This is going to be kind of cool. So where do we go from here, Brandon? Like, what are you seeing? Is it really just how do we increase the performance? I was talking to a gentleman earlier today. Let me see if I can pull this back up. So I was talking to a gentleman earlier today. We've had him on the program, Mr. Andrew. Would you call him Andrew? But basically, I was asking him. I said, what are we looking at for the next iteration of Intel processors? Is this going to get fixed? And he says, Intel's 3-step cycle, it means that we have Icy Lake for one more generation, and they're just not going to be able to make a huge change like speculative branching fixings. And so they're not going to attempt to make the CPU compatible in just one generation. And then he says what's worse is they're already manufacturing them. So they're going to have to fix it via firmware, but that's, really not going to be any different than what we have now. So hardware changes, like actually fixed processors that no longer contain this fundamental vulnerability that where we need to do this separation thing at the kernel level, that's not coming for a long, long time.
Yeah, where we go, I really don't know. I think for now we're going to have to fix it in software. Really, this just makes me want to go invest in RISC-V. So,
right, yeah.
And ARM, something a little bit more open. That's my personal opinion, and but I think that's what we're gonna end up having to do is. From an open source as like an open source and free software enthusiast, I'm gonna want something that I know that I can go look at, even if I don't understand it. I can say, okay, this person I trust has said that this is fine.
Yeah, right.
And so I really don't know. In the case of Intel right now, I just with Intel chips, with x86 chipsets, we'll just have to fix it in software for the time being.
Sure. We got one more call that I want to get in here before I let you go. James is calling from Idaho. Hey, James, welcome to the Ask Noah Show.
Hello.
Hey, James, how can we help?
This one is what I'm trying to work out in my head. I have an SSD to boot the system. I want it as a spinning disk, but there's technically three types of spinning disks: the SSHD and the True 700, because it's going to be a 3-inch drive, and the cheaper, like a Western Digital Blue, which spin at 540. I don't know if there's going to be performance hits if I went low a budget or medium, 700 RPM, or high budget on performance for opening basic files like photos and documents, or does it really matter with the three basic spinning disk technologies that are out?
Sure. That makes sense. Brandon, what's your thoughts? Is it worth it for a spinning disk? Is it worth it for a Is it worth it for an SSD, or what do you think of the hybrids? Those the thing that have the little SSD cache in them.
Oh, I haven't touched the hybrids in years. I found them to be unreliable. At least I did. Anyway.
And not any faster than a spinning disk.
Yeah. So I'm all SSD except in my home NAS, and from spinners I only use Western Digital reds and blacks.
I agree.
That's all I use.
I agree. I agree, James. What I would do is I would do if you need the extra storage space, like you're storing a lot of data, I would do a Western Digital. I would do a Western Digital Red. I'm a big fan of them. If you can afford it, or you're not looking to do a ton of data, you just need some extra place to some extra space to put something. Put a 512 in there. They're about $200. You can get them even cheaper if you buy like a SanDisk. It'll be an SSD. It'll be super fast. And the nice thing, remember about SSDs, they only wear down to a read-only state. So the likelihood is when they fail, they fade into read-only state, so you don't lose data. You just can't write to them anymore. And that's a very beneficial thing, at least from my point of view. Brandon Johnson from RedHat. We'll have your contact link in the show notes if people want to get a hold of you, follow what you do. And you're going to link us to that blog article that you're writing or have written?
Yeah, I'm still writing it. So as soon as I get it out, I'll be putting it on my personal blog. Just going to go over like what I'm seeing in my home lab, and because I have a pretty a lot of hardware, and I just I'm just going to start tweaking and seeing what will eke out every last bit of performance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate having you.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime, Noah.
Great. Thanks so much, Brandon. Again, Brandon Johnson from RedHat. Huge thanks to him and the team of RedHat for what they're doing to mitigate this. Hey, guys, we did something really fun in the Telegram group. If you're not part of it, you should join telegram.asknoahshow.com. We were joking around about what our group was up to. Let me pull it back up here. Let's see here. We are at 409 members. And I didn't notice when we topped over 400. I was like, that's really cool. We should have celebrated 400. And the guys in here are giving me a hard time. I said, we should do a celebration. We get to the next 100 or whatever. And they said, next 100. Dude, you got to be a real nerd. Celebrate when we get to 512. So I said, are you guys nuts? We're not going to pick up 112 users. In any realistic time frame. I think we can. So, okay, it's a challenge. I don't back down from a challenge. We are doing we're doing a contest inside of the telegram.asknoahshow.com group. If you join, lucky number 512, the 512th person to join wins a $51.20 gift card to Amazon.com. Now, after we get to 512 members, we're going to draw out of all 512 members. So if you're there, you're already entered to win, so to speak. Once we get to 512, we're going to draw one number, and that person is going to get a $128 gift card to Amazon.com. So make sure to join the Telegram group, telegram.asknoahshow.com. And also follow us on Twitter @AskNoahShow. We are revamping the Twitter sphere, and we're going to try to provide you with more up-to-date information on a more frequent basis. So we'd appreciate your support in both of those places. Now, we are doing something called the Linux Elimination Challenge. And if you're not familiar with what that is, it is a system that the Ask Noah Show community has created that basically what we're doing is we are evaluating different Linux distros. We're pitting them against one another, and we're trying to find which one is the best for a given purpose. So last week, we did a vote between Solus and Manjaro. Now, I had my own suspicions of which one was going to win, and I'm not going to tell you if it was right or if it was wrong. But needless to say, I was excited when I saw the results. The results, the winner between Solus and Manjaro is Manjaro. And it won by a fairly significant margin. It wasn't huge or anything. Let me see if I can get this pulled up here. It won by, let's see, we had 60 votes for Manjaro and 39 votes for Solus. So Manjaro is the winner. Solus is out of the running for the Linux Elimination Challenge. Now this week I decided I'm really going to pitch you guys against each other. We're really going to if it was heated last week, it's going to be more heated this week because we are pitting Canonical's Ubuntu, the #1 desktop operating system, at least touted by many, to be downloaded. Ubuntu is an open source software operating system that you guys know what Ubuntu is. I don't have to read that. Come on. It runs everything from the cloud to your desktop, to your server, to your Internet of Things. Ubuntu. Is Ubuntu the best desktop operating system? I don't know. And we're pitting it against, drum roll please, Fedora. Yes, that's right. Red Hat's Fedora. My chosen operating system for many, many years, running it since version 1. Fedora, choose freedom. Choose Fedora. Less setup, more innovation. Choose a flavor of Fedora streamlined for your needs to get work done right away. You can do Fedora Server, Fedora Workstation. Of course, we're talking about the best distro for the desktop, so I'm thinking Fedora Workstation. So make sure when this episode is published to head over to asknoahshow.com/elimination, asknoahshow.com/elimination, and let us know what you think. Which is your vote? Would you use Fedora or Ubuntu? And a reminder, you don't have to have it doesn't have to be the operating system that you personally would use. It's just if you were going to choose one of those things, if you were on a Linux island and your choice was between Fedora and Ubuntu, which one of those two would you choose? asknoahshow.com/elimination. I try for the most part to keep the radio station and the podcast network, but the exception to that is this show, because other than this show, the two don't really overlap, and so viewers and the viewers of JB don't really care what KEQQ in Grand Forks is doing, and the listeners of KEQQ don't really care what's going on at JB. So I try to keep both of them separate, except for the legal ID at the top of the hour, which I have to do. But tonight might be the exception, because I think what's coming up next might be interesting to everyone, to both audiences. KEQQ's harm reduction host, Will, who, by the way, follows the show now that our show time has moved to Tuesdays. Since we moved to Tuesdays, we are now his lead-in. And he's doing an on-location broadcast tonight at 7 p.m., so that's just in 4 minutes here, right after this show. And Will is downtown at the Empire Arts Theater, where the Students for the Sensible Drug Policy are holding a panel tonight. And on that panel is, I believe, people from the city, as well as people from the Students for Sensible Drug Policy, and they are going to be having a discussion about the issues raised in a film called The Opioid Epidemic, Seeking Solutions in North Dakota. Now, the opioid epidemic was produced by Prairie Public with support from BCBS-ND, the Caring Foundation, North Dakota Medical Foundation, and Bell Bank. The Grand Forks Community Call to Action on Addiction and Substance Abuse. And there will be a co-host that is going to be mediating the event and stuff like that. And Will's going to be representing KEQQ Radio there. And so if you're passionate about sensible drug policy or care about that or want to hear Will's take, Will does a show every, I guess Tuesday at 7 p.m. called the Harm Reduction Report. It follows this show. And if that's interesting, you can hear that program coming right up on 88.3 FM here in Grand Forks, or streamed live 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 at KEQQradio.com. So if that's interesting to you, check that out. A huge thanks to everyone that made it, people that call into the show, and a huge thanks to Brandon Johnson from Red Hat. Again, we're going to continue to provide you updated information about what is going on here, and you can follow us on Twitter. That's the best place to get updates. Now, the great thing about Twitter is, because I put a lot of thought into this, there's a lot of people don't like having to sign up for an account for something, and I'm one of those people. I don't really want to have to sign up for an account. But the thing with Twitter, and why I'm willing to make an exception here, is you don't actually have to have an account to follow, to look at the updates on Twitter. You can go to twitter.com/AskNoahShow and see what we're posting on Twitter. In fact, we're looking at ways that we can actually integrate that into the Ask Noah dashboard, asknoahshow.com. And if we can do that, then that's a really great way for us to put in one place, without having to host a bunch of back-end infrastructure, one place updates about the shows and stuff like that. And we're also going to try to get news articles and stuff like that tweeted out, things that we talk about during the show notes. By the way, if you don't usually look at the show notes, look at the show notes this week, because it's not always I put this much work into them, but there is a plethora of links in the show notes. So if you really want to understand this thing, check that out. Also, go back and check out episode 43. The Ask Noah Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, the Ask Noah Show continues next week at 6 p.m. Central on Tuesdays. It's going to take me a while to get used to. Huge thanks to Vox Telesys for providing our phone system. Ben, our producer, Sarah, our call screener. We'll hand you off to harm reduction coming up next on KEQQ 88.3.